A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. On that day, as evening drew on, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took Jesus with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. A violent squall came up, and waves were breaking over the boat, so that it was already filling up. Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. They woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Be quiet, be still." The wind ceased, and there was great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you terrified? Why do you not have faith yet?" They were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this whom even wind and sea obey?" The Gospel of the Lord. John Newton was born in 1725 in England. His dad was a sailor, first in the Navy, and then he was the captain of a merchant ship. But when John was only 10 years old, his mom died, and his dad decided that rather than entrusting him to strangers, John should come on the ship with him and live in the captain's quarters. And John, being only 10, learned thoroughly the ways of seafaring up until the age of 17. And of course, when you're 17, you kind of think you know everything, and so he decided he didn't need dad anymore, that he would strike out on his own. But his father was really disturbed because dad had tried to instill within him certain values that now John seemed to have completely abandoned. He went for the most lucrative kind of sailing job available, slave trading, to his father's great despair. And he worked his way up from the age of 17 to the age of 23, where he was a captain of a ship. By the time that he was 24, he was not only being the captain of ships that carried slaves to North America, he was actually buying and selling them. And he had gained so much money that he didn't need to be a sailor anymore. He could just sit in his nice country home and rake in the bucks as slaves were bought and sold. Of course, every once in a while, he had to go across from Britain to North America to make sure that his business was being properly attended to. And on one trip back, just off the coast of Donegal, Ireland, there was a great squall that hit the ship that he was on. There were 18-foot high waves, and his sailing ship was knocked about as if it were just a toy. People were falling overboard. The waves were crashing over the edge of the ship, and everything was pure pandemonium. And John did something he had not done since he was 17 when he left his father. For the first time, he prayed. And he said, "Lord, if you will save us, I will be your slave. I will no longer indulge in slave trading, but I will be your slave." And suddenly, ironically, the waves calmed down and the ship was able to enter into Loch Swilly. Ironically, where my grandma was from, that's how come I know the story. And from then on in, he kept good to his word. He left slave trading, and gradually over the years, he became more and more, instead of neutral, an abolitionist. He became an Anglican priest who preached out against slave trading. And he wrote several hymns as well, but probably the hymn that we know best is the hymn in which he refers to that conversion experience on that storm-tossed ship. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved and set me free. I once was lost, but now am found." I think I screwed that up, but lost and now am free. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." The hymn was about his remembrance of being on that storm-tossed ship and how God had saved him. And he was convinced that there was divine intervention there. And he was convinced that for the rest of his life, he must make good on the promise that he made to God, that he would forswear his earlier days and do God's bidding. Why do I tell you this? Because it is very reminiscent of what Jesus' apostles experienced on the day that we hear this gospel. The Sea of Galilee is 685 feet below sea level. It's surrounded by high mountains. And in the fall and the early winter, when cold fronts come through, right after sunset, the mountains become much chillier. But the water down in the Sea of Galilee is protected and is warm from the summer sun. That warmth pushes air aloft, and the cold air from the mountains replaces it. And as that wind rushes down the mountains, it creates a storm. It creates great waves that you wouldn't expect in what is not a terribly big body of water. The people of that time saw it as a sign of evil, as a sign of rebellion against God, that you could go from placid waters and 20 minutes later have 18-foot waves, that you could go from everything being sunny and clear to all of a sudden night falling and the darkness of the water engulfing ships that had been unlucky enough not to reach shore before sunset. And so as a result of that, these waters were seen by people in both the Old Testament and the New Testament as a symbol of evil, as a symbol of chaos, as a symbol of death. And the only thing that could quench that storm was the almighty power of God, which we hear in the book of Job in our first reading. Nobody but God can set a limit on what the storm can do. Nobody but God can set a limit on how far the waters will encroach. And we heard in the responsorial psalm, a thanksgiving psalm for God saving people from that very storm. That is the storm that the apostles are in, a storm that generations had experienced, and suddenly they know that they're done for. And they call on Jesus and say, "Don't you care? Can't you do something?" They probably at this point earlier in the ministry of Jesus didn't know that he could do something, but they were desperate. It was like a Hail Mary pass in a Notre Dame football team. But Jesus did wake up and simply say, "Be quiet, be still." And the storm ended. And they respond by saying, "Who can this be? That the one thing that only God can stop, this man stopped. How can he do this unless he himself is God?" Now, I don't know if Mark intended it, but the early church loved this reading, absolutely loved this reading, because they were like a storm-tossed boat. They saw themselves as all being in the same boat together. They had separated from the Jews, so the Jews weren't happy with them. The Romans were persecuting them. It was a capital offense to be a Christian. You would be killed for it. The storms were tough, and you didn't know what it would mean if you would hold on to your faith. But they trusted that in this message, although Jesus doesn't stop the storms from starting, he is the one that can make them stop. He is the one that can save. And ever since then, we have envisioned ourselves as a church sailing through stormy waters, but Jesus is in the boat with us. And Jesus, when the waters become too tough, too terrifying, too engulfing, he stops them. He says, "Be still, be quiet." So let's reflect on this. We just came through COVID. Many people here, many people we know, many people we love have cancer or some other debilitating disease. Many people have had accidents and injuries. Many people worry about whether or not they can keep their jobs, or worry about the fact that it seems like their boss hates them. Many people worry about their savings for their retirement as the stock market goes up and down. Many people worry about whether they can afford their rent, as rent seems to skyrocket in Naples. Many people worry about their kids. Have their kids gone off the rails? have their kids lost sight of what's really important in life? We face so many storms, but in each and every storm, Jesus is in the boat. That's what Mark wants us to know. That's what the early church wants us to know. That's what Jesus wants us to know. It doesn't mean it will be easy, but it does mean it will be possible to sail through the storms of life into smoother, calmer waters. So let's thank the Lord today that he is with us. Let's trust that, yes, there will be storms, but at the end of the storm, there is sunlight and calm in the Lord's presence.